We all love a spirited gaming debate, but lately anything to do with Company of Heroes 3 gets a little too intense for my liking. My most recent experience of this was over a bag of Doritos with a player who I like to call the Gibbon. Now, the Gibbon loves Company of Heroes 2 for its multiplayer, so I very innocently asked whether they're looking forward to Company of Heroes 3, and I immediately wished I hadn't. I practically had to hide behind the sofa as they hurled abuse at the game's art direction and sound design, spat venom at the zoom level and the UI. Why would I pay $60 for a game that at best is on par with Company of Heroes 2 and at worst is the next Dawn of War 3? The mere mention of which made us both shudder. Raising my head above the parapet, I gently reminded him that the developers have said they'll fix a lot of the graphical and sound issues before launch. The Gibbon scoffed, just like they did with Age of Empires 4, while his gangly, hotkeying fingers fiddled at the door handle. It'll be on sale with a 90% discount by Christmas. And they stormed off in a big huff. I sat there, eating my Doritos. Questions began running through my mind. Will Relic improve the visuals enough to appease the Gibbon and his crew? And even if they do, will the game offer enough to tempt players from Company of Heroes 2? If it doesn't, when might it go on sale to tempt players to purchase? And by how much? Will the dynamic campaign be a disaster? Or attract a new kind of player? Then it occurred to me. An RTS developed by Relic, released in the shadow of its outrageously successful multiplayer predecessor. We've been here before. Age of Empires 4, to be precise. Players criticised the visuals prior to launch. What did Relic do about that? The game needed to tempt players from Age of Empires 2. A year after release, has it managed to do so? And come to think of it, I'm pretty sure Company of Heroes 2 launched in an absolute mess itself. So how long did it take Relic to start discounting the price on that? And by how much? I got to the end of my Doritos, tangy cheese obviously, and decided it was time to do some hardcore analytics. So what exactly was the Gibbon referring to about the game's art direction? And more importantly, what have Relic said they're going to do about it? In a nutshell, the main complaints are: the tanks look like toys. Cartoonish is the most used word. The sound design is a bit boring. It doesn't look like a 2023 game. And ultimately, side by side, Company of Heroes 2 simply looks superior. And the list goes on. Now, these issues have all been covered extensively by others already, but if you'd like to know more, I can highly recommend a Reddit post by Nice Person's Garden. What a lovely name that is, by the way. Who doesn't bitch about the graphics. They analyse the proportions, the details and technical issues with the models in such a way that even a potato like me can understand. I highly recommend it, and will leave a link in the description below for your perusal. But what I wanted to focus on in this video is Relic's response to these criticisms. There's a video from Relic and a post on Steam, both of which I'll link in the description below for you. But basically they said there were several bugs in the playtest version that have already been fixed. And in particular, a significant lighting upgrade will be in the final release version of the game. They even gave us some before and after pictures showing how the game did look versus how it should look, which, I mean, I couldn't tell the difference, but most other people seem happy with them, so I guess that's fine then. Something else to bear in mind, though, is that this cartoonish look may not simply be down to errors and bugs that need correcting. If you recall, Age of Empires 4 faced similar criticisms with its art direction in the lead up to release. So did Relic change that? No. In fact, they said that it was intentional. The spearmen have oversized spears to help the player more easily identify that unit as a spearman. But as a result, the scale of the spear looks a bit ridiculous and cartoon-like. Relic has developed both of these games, so to an extent, some of this cartoonish look in Company of Heroes 3 may simply be the result of a design choice to help RTS players more easily identify and distinguish between the various units, and therefore could be here to stay. But with that said, if you've read the Reddit post I recommended, you'll see that many of the issues are simply errors that need fixing, and most appear relatively easy to sort out. However, promises to fix the issues is one thing. Whether Relic has a good record of delivering on such promises, and in a timely fashion, is another thing entirely. So what can we learn from Age of Empires 4 in that respect? Unfortunately, the player base seems a little frustrated with how stale the game feels, and the main complaint is how long it takes Relic to rebalance certain areas of the game, if at all. Although, to be fair, I don't think a developer has ever released balance updates and bug fixes quickly enough to appease 100% of the player base before, but it does look like Relic need to learn lessons from Age of Empires 4 and up their game for Company of Heroes 3. It would make a real statement if they sorted out these teething problems prior to release, or just after, and just kept the bug fixes and balance updates coming. Right, graphics and sound design done. But even with those fixed, will those who love Company of Heroes 2 for its multiplayer skirmish make the move over to Company of Heroes 3 in great enough numbers for the game to be considered a success? The feedback on the core gameplay so far is positive, very positive, but I can't help but ask the question, what do you get in the new skirmish mode that you don't already get in the previous game? Soldiers automatically vault over walls, so you don't have to manually click each time. Infantry can ride tanks. These are nice changes to make, but the fact that these are the kind of changes being highlighted shows that actually not that much has changed compared to Company of Heroes 2. But they still want players to spend $60 for the privilege, although price is an interesting subject that we'll get onto in a moment. Something the new game has done, however, is dared to venture into new theatres of the war, namely Italy and North Africa. And I get so many comments asking why World War II games are so obsessed with the usual Eastern and Western fronts. So that's a big plus point for Company of Heroes 3. But I don't know about you, I can't help but think the factions are a bit boring? Or is that just me being a negative Nelly? So let's revisit that price tag for a moment, as it's often cited as the main reason why players won't be purchasing the game. $60 for a game isn't unusual these days, but it is a big barrier to entry, particularly if the game isn't seen as a big upgrade from the previous titles. So let's assume for a moment that the game has a decent start, but player numbers drop off significantly after 2 months. How long will it be until the game first goes on sale, and by how much? Company of Heroes 2 first released at $60 in July 2013. The first sale took it down to $40 in September 2013, 3 months after it released. Then, from November 2013, the price was permanently reduced to $40, with discounts down to $13.60 by Christmas of that very same year. Age of Empires 4, by comparison, also started out at $60. 2 months in, the first 10% discount was seen, then 25%, then 50%, before seeing a permanent reduction to $40 a year after release, and going as low as $24 in the most recent sale. So yes, $60 upon release, but the way things are going, a lot of players could be making the move to Company of Heroes 3 with a hefty discount towards the end of 2023. Plus, I'm sure they'd be buying a far better product by then too. So yeah, Mr. Gibbon, it probably will be on sale soon, but that's a good thing for all of us. But how did Age of Empires 4 get on with tempting players away from Age of Empires 2, and what can we learn from that to help us predict the future of Company of Heroes 3? So right now on Steam, over a year since release, the average player numbers for Age of Empires 4 are about 12,000, whereas Age of Empires 2 is about 20,000 for the definitive edition and a few thousand more for the standard edition. Both games are available on Xbox Game Pass too, but it's plain to see Age of Empires 2 still firmly holds the crown. There wasn't even a noticeable dip in the Age of Empires 2 player numbers when the new game released. The two games don't have to be in direct competition though. It's not like the player numbers of Company of Heroes 2 need to collapse for the new game to be considered a success. Both games being popular for a time, with an orderly transition of power from 2 to 3 over the next few years, is probably the optimal outcome for Relic. But the key to facilitating a slow shift of the player base from one game to the other is whether the technical and balancing issues are being fixed in a timely manner. Get that right, and the game has hope, even if it does have a rocky start. But as we identified earlier, I hope Relic have learned their lessons from Age of Empires 4 and will up their game with frequent and targeted updates for Company of Heroes 3. It's absolutely crucial that they do. However, one thing we can't predict is the impact of that big old curveball, the dynamic campaign. Relic kind of dipped a toe in this with Ardennes Assault, but nothing like the scale we're going to see in Company of Heroes 3. Might the appeal of the game pivot entirely so as to attract a new kind of player, making it less of an issue if a chunk of the Company of Heroes 2 player base decide to stay where they are? Now, let me see. A game with a turn-based map with the occasional RTS skirmish. Now, what does that remind you of? Total War is the comparison most often used. A turn-based map with a logistics system of sorts, units can move around the map like chess pieces and engage in an auto-resolve style battle, with the option of going full RTS if you choose to. Needless to say, the Gibbon could not be less interested in this, but a few of my Total War buddies, who are all quite gentlemanly compared to the Gibbon, are at least raising an eyebrow to this. Total War in a World War II setting is quite a potent combination, but do Relic have what it takes to compete with the likes of Creative Assembly and Paradox Interactive in this arena? Unlikely, at least at first. That's just my opinion, but Creative Assembly have been refining the Total War formula for as long as I can remember, and Hearts of Iron 4, it's not like that was Paradox's first rodeo. So is Company of Heroes 3 really going to attract Total War players who have always wanted to dip a toe in the World War II setting? Upon release, it's unlikely. I suspect the dynamic campaign will feel more like an early access addition to the game for months, if not years. But given enough time, and as long as Relic listen to the community, they could mould a champion of the strategy genre that attracts players of an entirely different breed. Perhaps not the Men of War or Ostfront crowd, though. I think Company of Heroes 3 will always be a bit too arcadey for them. So in conclusion, it's perfectly possible that Company of Heroes 3 will be having an identity crisis in the future, but bringing it back to the here and now, will they improve the immediate problems with the visuals and audio? To an extent, as much of it seems fixable, but it may take some time, and some of the design choices will be here to stay. Even if they do improve the visuals, does the game offer enough to convince players to spend $60 when they already own Company of Heroes 2? Based on Age of Empires 4, it looks unlikely. As a result, will Relic lower the price to tempt players in? Almost certainly a few months after launch, and probably aggressively discounting by the end of 2023. But will that work? It depends on how well Relic perform with updating and refreshing the game, which all depends on whether they've learned their lessons from Age of Empires 4, as a lack of updates seems to be the limiting factor there. Then finally, will the dynamic campaign attract a new kind of player? It's unlikely at first, as it will feel a bit early access, but over time, it might be what makes or breaks the success of the game. I know I'm excited for it. We all know someone like the Gibbon. It's as if they want the game to fail simply because it dares to exist. They find the negative in everything, and all we can do is smile and nod. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's just as unhelpful to pretend that everything is fine when there are clearly issues. Positivity is great, but it's okay to criticize a game, to constructively debate the issues. In fact, it's almost essential to enable the game to improve. Truth is, we need players like the Gibbon, with their smug faces and claw-like hotkey fingers, to point out the issues we're sometimes too blinded by nostalgia or hope to see. I just wish they did it with a bit more decorum, is all. I promised you a bunch of analytics, and I'm conscious that much of this video ended up being opinion. However, I'm happy to stick my neck out and venture an opinion if that's what it takes to start a spirited and constructive debate. I realise much of this video may come across as negative, but for the record, I think this game can succeed. I want it to succeed because I want the RTS genre as a whole to flourish. But I don't want the developers to start thinking we will accept anything less than we, dedicated RTS fans, deserve. But now it's over to you. By far the best part of these videos is in the debate and discussion from you lot in the comments below. I learn so much from you knowledgeable buggers in the comments that I spend most of my day now simply talking to fellow passionate players. So, please tell me your thoughts on Company of Heroes 3, its chances of success. What do you like? What do you think can improve? And if you liked the video, please give it a cheeky thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.